Hello, this is Terry Collins. I'm a business growth consultant at CONNSTEP. Today we're going to talk about capacity analysis, so let's get started. Wouldn't it be nice if things were this simple? Our mission for capacity is to ensure your ability to deliver on time. Our objective is to develop a bottoms-up, evidentiary-based capacity analysis developed from process times. Capacity analysis is a comparison of what we need to do versus what we can do. Some of the uses of capacity are for production planning and scheduling, for staffing, equipment needs and utilization, for laying out your facility or relayout, for costing and financial reasons, to understand imbalance between cells and lines, to analyze drop-in work, for constraints, for process imbalance, to have a deeper understanding of capacity requirements, for balance in the supply chain, running various scenarios and scenario planning, and for realignment of supply chain partners. We mentioned a moment ago about evidentiary capacity. Non-evidentiary capacity is we usually receive capacity in terms of yes or no, yes, we can do it, or we get responses in percentages only. Sometimes the response is in a number of units. We get requirements without availability, and vice versa. Sometimes we get availability without requirements. Sometimes we just get capacity around the constraints. We know our business better than anyone. Here's our two issues. Sometimes setup hadn't been isolated or is actually not even included anywhere. And sometimes we have capacity but hadn't considered efficiency, utilization, and first pass yield, which means essentially assuming a perfect factory. So we have this slide to help just understand the terms here. This is meant to depict capacity. So it's the shape of a pipe flowing from left to right. The diameter of the pipe is capacity. The length of the pipe is the overall lead time. We have here 3 cells, 1, 2, 3. First cell you see depicted there are 3 processes, with the red being setup and blue being cycle time times demand or the load. And the red ovals are meant to depict queue time in between either processes or between the cells. So we wanted to show the difference in capacity and lead time. Capacity on the top portion of this graphic is meant to depict 15 days lead time, but the very top little drawing there is less capacity, and the next one down is the same 15-day lead time, but with more capacity. So the diameter of the pipe, again, is the capacity. You take the same larger pipe diameter on the bottom portion of the graphic, and again, the diameter is the capacity, but the length of the pipe, here 3 days lead time versus 15 days lead time, but with the same capacity. So there is a relationship between lead time and capacity, but it's certainly not an intimate one. So when we mention capacity, are we talking labor or machines? Well, if one person is running one machine for one shift, then essentially labor and machine capacity are the same. But of course, we recognize that sometimes one person is running multiple machines, or we have a person on a machine on days, and then for nights we have a different person on the same machine. So those have to be calculated independently. So the format for capacity here is cycle time times demand is the list of your parts times how long they take becomes the requirements. And we compare that to the available time, but usually strike that with a line graph. So in this case, we certainly can actually do what we need to do, the work we need to do here. When we synthesize capacity, there's basically two different perspectives. On the left-hand side, we have a capacity situation for a process where they can easily do what needs to be done, but there is somewhat of a cost issue because the gap between the cycle time times demand, the blue bar, and the line graph, there is somewhat of a gap there. So the bigger the gap, the higher the cost. On the right side, though, it's not a cost issue, but we simply can't meet our customer requirements or the demand that we've been given. Capacity should always be evaluated in time, never units, because we don't know if we're going to get a large unit or a small unit. So we want to kind of represent this situation. You see here 8 boxes. Those are meant to represent 8 products that we have to do during the day. They take 60 minutes each. So of course, if we take 60 minutes each times 8, it's 8 hours worth of work we need to do. And then we compare that with availability of 8 hours. And so this would be depict 100% theoretical capacity. But we take the same amount of requirements another day or another month for that matter. And so still 8 units to do, but they only take 30 minutes each, so less work content. So of course, that's 4 hours worth of work. So you certainly can make this situation in terms of providing the customer what they need, but then you have a cost issue on your hands. Just in general, the granularity for capacity, we like to do that on a per day basis. That way we can understand if it's anywhere around 480 minutes, then basically it's just one operator. So it's easier for plant managers to synthesize this and kind of understand what the perspective is. The time horizon, though, is quarterly, so that means that we basically take a daily average for a quarter, and a quarter being 13 weeks. We don't generally do capacity any more frequently than per quarter because with only being 13 weeks, it's very difficult to react to either buy machines or acquire machines or even installing machines or acquiring operators. It's difficult to do that in less than 13 weeks. So we generally recommend daily, but on a quarterly basis. And then also I want to mention that availability and requirements should be for the same time period. You'll get very skewed results if you don't do that. So we have a series of slides following this slide here, and what they're meant to be is how can you do capacity without having to do your entire facility? So the first natural starting point might be items that are habitually late. So we have here hypothetically product number 2 and 5, which have been late. So if you want to start at a logical starting point, there'd be these 2 late items. Conversion strategy number 2, single points of failure. And single points of failure are where there's no other alternatives. So if your capacity abilities are somewhat constrained, then you could start with just where you think proactively there's some risk, and this being a single point of failure. Single points of failure can turn into constraints once they've actually occurred, but a constraint number 3 can actually happen without any machines at all. It could just be a manual process where you're having trouble. So again, single points of failure can become constraints. We generally proactively look at single points of failure before they occur. And then, of course, constraints are generally reactive or after the fact. Another natural strategy would be to just do capacity around product families, but we don't have to do the whole family. We have here the yellow star represents a star product, which is generally the most volume times, the most annual volume times the most processes. And we use that product to symbolize or represent the entire part family. And so you could just do capacity around that and then put the volume for the entire family on that 1 star product. So it's a pretty quick way of getting a wide band of coverage. Number 5, shared resources. Typically they're upstream, but of course we realize they can be downstream, but it's generally a bank of processes and or machines that serve downstream product families. And because of the fact that they serve a large number of products and or families downstream, they can be it's very critical that we understand what our capacity is around shared resources. Number 6, special outside processes such as heat treating and coatings. Sometimes they're a real capacity issue. So if you can work with your outside vendor to help understand what their capacity is and how you fit in. Number 7, you may want to just simply do capacity around products that are going to grow in the imminent near future. And we have here product number 4, plans to grow that product. So you might want to do capacity and or a buildup around product number 4. Another strategy for getting more coverage with less resources in terms of capacity is using the Pareto principle. And you see Mr. Bill Pareto here depicted. And of course, the big thing is 20% of the items or 80% of the volume. So why not do capacity around that 20%? So we have a chart representing the 80-20, if you would. The bars are representing various products, and they've been sorted in a descending order. And here you see that the first two products, after they've been sorted, represent nearly 80% of everything. So if you didn't have the capacity to do capacity across your entire facility, then if you just did these two products, you'd have 80% of all the volume in the shop. This exercise can be done either on volume, which is number 3, or dollars, number 1, or even on profit potential, number 2. So it can be done three different ways. This is a spreadsheet that literally made the previous graph. And so we have here 1 through 12 items with the annual volume, the unit cost, the annual dollar volume. And then we have, after sorting this, you can see that the first two items, that's the A products are the 20% of the items, that's 80% of the volume. Because the cumulative line on the previous graph was right at 80% when you capture the first two items. The next set of items in terms of order would be B's and C's. Generally, we do A's certainly before B's and C's. So we have a notion here called propagation of variation, and what it really means is, given everything else equal, I would work upstream before I work downstream, because upstream products have a big impact on downstream processes. So with everything else equal, start upstream. And finally, of course, given the time and energy, you could just simply do all your products across the house. The basic building blocks of capacity, step 1, we take the demand and multiply it times the time per unit. That's really what we call cycle time times demand. That equals requirement, C. And then we look at our availability, which is D. We contrast C against availability D, and that's capacity in percent. And that's literally how the calculations work. So the basic components for capacity are, we need to understand our demand. We need to know all of our process times, what our allowances are, and availability. So if we put together most everything we've talked about here, we have a graph drawn to scale where the cycle time times demand is in the blue at the bottom, and then the setup time times its demand in red being non-value added. And then we consider utilization efficiency and first pass yields is elongating the cycle time times demand, because it's not a perfect world. And then at the top, you see 3 different availability lines. We start out with the middle one. That's 100% theoretical capacity, so available time. And then we have an 8% cushion here, so the capacity cushion. And then you see some hypothetical overtime percentages, because we have a large block of overtime planned for some extended period of time. Where do you get the times for capacity? Well, one way to get them is through what we call historical, or from your clocking. But the assumption is that if a process yields 40 units in 40 hours, so we logically assume it takes an hour each. The problem is that that's rarely true, and usually very underinflated. So some of the reasons for that is wasted time on the clock. We get clocked in, but we lose time in the morning after a long weekend, or mornings or after lunch. Also what we call cross-clocking. We get clocked in the morning on A, but we start making B at, say, 9 o'clock, but we don't get clocked. And so that makes A twice as expensive as it should be, and B free. So of course, both of those skew the whole clocking formula that we talked about at the top of this slide. The best place to get times are from what we call engineering standards, and this is real-time motion study, or predetermined time, MTM. And if you're in a real hurry, you don't have time to do those studies, it can take some time, then if you just ask the operator, you can get some incredibly good times, amazingly. And you should ask them, though, in terms they can relate to. Generally, when I ask operators how long it takes, the response is, I don't know. But if you see 2 boxes there and you ask them how long it takes to do the boxes, or skids or crates or whatever they have, usually they can relate to that, and they can tell you pretty closely. This chart is really the buildup of everything about capacity we've talked about so far. A few pieces here. On the left side is the load, on the right side is availability. And under load, we see the part number 1 through 6, the respective daily demand for each one of those parts. Product number 1, there's a demand of 10 per day. Standard time, the time it takes to actually do the job, or cycle time. And I mentioned we multiply the daily demand times the standard time to get the total time by product. So obviously 10 times 5 is 50 minutes. So we have here a grand total of 337 minutes for all the products they plan on making that day. But it's not a perfect world, so we use 12% utilization, or 80. The complement of that 88% utilization. Efficiency of 95% and first pass yield of 98. So they add respectively 40 minutes, 20 minutes, and 8 minutes for a total load for the day of 404 minutes. And then we turn to the right side of the slide here, and we see we have for one shift, we have one operator, 8 hours times 60 minutes, 480 minutes. We have two 10-minute breaks for 20. So that leaves us a net of 460 minutes. We have a capacity cushion of around 8%, also called planned load threshold. And so that's 423 minutes. So the takeaway from the slide is that we certainly can do 404 minutes worth of work in 423 minutes, which are available. So the graph on the lower right-hand side is meant to depict that to scale. Again, the blue being cycle time times demand, red being setup, and there's your efficiency, utilization, and first pass yield. This graph is meant to depict the output of the capacity analysis tool. So we have here depicted 5 processes. Process number 4 is way over capacity, so it's a big issue. The rest of things are somewhere around the overtime line or between the capacity cushion and the overtime line, which is probably very manageable. We have 2 things, process number 2 and number 5 are actually under the capacity cushion, but not to the extent that would cause a large cost issue. So they're probably, especially number 2, is right around ideal. So we think capacity, not understanding our capacity, is a lot like driving at night without headlights. We've been doing fine. We've been lucky. We hadn't hit any real big bumps in the road. But the next slide is meant to depict it's a tough, dark world out there at times, and so at least the headlights will provide some understanding of what we need to do for all the uses we mentioned, anywhere from drop-ins to imbalance. So at CONNSTEP, we can provide the capacity, expertise, and experience you need. We are familiar with capacity tools. We have a standardized approach for you. We can coach you in synthesizing the capacity results, and we can help you with the remediation workshops that's needed to close the gaps on your capacity. We can provide the training and mentoring for capacity, and we can facilitate the process transparently. Typically, this is done with one person in your facility, so we won't lose any units while we're doing this, and we can generally work with that one person without really involving almost anyone else, actually. And we can build up your capability. It's one thing for us to do your capacity. We could build up your capability where you can continue the effort and you can do your own capacity. And we have a number of right-sized tools to help you in the endeavor of capacity analysis. So this comical graphic here is meant to depict we can continue to kind of work hard and long hours without really understanding our capacity, but we think capacity tools provides a much more efficient way of running your business. That concludes this webinar on capacity analysis. This has been a previously recorded webinar, so we're not able to take your questions, but feel free to contact me at the information shown on this slide. Thank you for your time and interest.